Hello, I'm Cindy Arenberg-Seltzer, President and CEO of the Children's Services Council of Broward County. Welcome to another edition of Future First, Focus on Broward's Children. There is nothing as heartbreaking as the death or permanent injury of a baby as a result of an avoidable cause. Preventable infant death, which can occur within all socioeconomic backgrounds, is just that, preventable. Educating the mother and father of the baby along with other caregivers is a critical step to best protect the baby. Today we will address the best ways to protect your child from preventable death and injury by discussing choosing a safe caregiver, preventing shaken baby syndrome, and promoting safe sleeping practices. Joining me to discuss these issues are Dr. John Wright, Director of the Child Protection Team of Broward County, Cassandra Sands, Interconception Health Program Manager for the Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies Coalition of Broward County, and Donna Sogikian, Executive Director of the Healthy Start Coalition of Broward County. Welcome, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this such an important topic. It is heartbreaking to think of children dying for reasons that could be prevented. And Dr. Wright, I want to start with you. At the Child Protection Team, I know you see a lot of these death and serious injuries. Can you speak to some of them, please?
Yeah, when infants are traumatically injured or die, often there's some preventable component. We do a very thorough review of infant deaths here in Broward County. And we see some common features. Unsafe sleep practices is a major cause of sleep-related death. Child abuse, shaken baby syndrome, and other traumatic injuries of young children and babies center around crying. I mean, I think that's been very well established as one of the major triggers for people lashing out and doing something violent to a baby. And
I think for most parents, on the one hand, you think this child is so delicate, you're afraid of breaking it just by looking at it, and at the same time, maybe not quite understanding about what's going on with the neck and why shaking a baby is so dangerous.
Well, shaking, we really feel like the things that we see in shaken baby syndrome are not just the result of bouncing a baby on the knee or normal handling. It really is a violent act that has occurred. And what happens there is that the brain will slosh around inside the head and they'll break some blood vessels around the brain. They'll break some blood vessels in the back of the eye. And the most important thing is the brain itself is damaged. So the baby will often come in with difficulty breathing and be seizing and near death when they present with shaken baby syndrome. So by the time they come to the hospital, if they come to the hospital instead of the medical examiner, it's often they're damaged. So there have been very effective programs around the country to prevent shaken baby syndrome because often the person who did it was angered and impaired or some other thing, and they lashed out, and the trigger is usually the baby's crying. So, the common features also that you see in the person who did it is stress, mental illness, depression, substance abuse, and a lot of domestic violence. In one program in New York, they had a very good success rate in reducing the overall rate of shaken baby syndrome with visiting nurses. And the only group they didn't have an effect on were those who had a lot of domestic violence. And in the margin, it said that there were 50 call-outs by the police a year for these people. So we're talking about really violent people who you can't really change their behavior. They're so far along in the continuum of violence. So, the community acceptance of violence and silence about it also kind of plays into that. So we want to have a peaceful community that has good mental health and people looking out for each other and making sure they're not stressed out. And parents need to think about what they're going to do when their baby cries. So how are they going to calm themselves down? What kind of techniques? And babies cry more and more every day until they get to be about 3.5 months. There's something called a crying curve. So they cry every day, every day, every day. And then all of a sudden, they'll go like, okay, this world is okay. I'm not going to cry so much. And just everybody needs to know that. I mean, that's the normal part of having a baby, is that they always cry more and more and more, and then they mellow out. So you got to get through that. And people, I think people's understanding of normal infant behavior is is often not present. So the thing they do physically to get the baby to stop crying is always wrong. So you should never try and force the baby to stop crying, ever. I mean, they're going to cry. You should just not have a temper tantrum yourself, and you got to get yourself calmed down. And then the stress and the tone of the household will go down. So,
well, and I think looking for, are they wet? Do they need a diaper change?
Right.
Are they hungry? Are they gassy?
Right.
And then just, do
you
they
go
need
through
a
that
cuddle?
list. You go through that list.
Start there.
Some babies are gassy, and so there's over-the-counter Mylicon and stuff like that, which works. And there was actually a recent study looking at probiotics for babies, which does work as well as Mylicon. So sometimes, and they're establishing their new bacteria in their gut, and so that's a little bit of a struggle for them. And they're eating for the first time, so that's like, they're going to complain about it. And they, pooping is a big deal for them. Like, okay, alert the media, we're going to have a bowel movement.
Right.
So those are the big things of the day. But, parents need to, and poverty, I don't think that poverty is a factor, but despair is a factor. Right. So people can be poor and not desperate or not despairing. They can just be, like, think of it as, I've been broke a few times, but never poor.
Right.
But they're the same thing. It's just a matter of attitude. So, it's difficult for people that are struggling. But there's always a community out there to help.
What your
right.
socioeconomic background is. Our viewers have heard me say this a lot. I have a 3.5-year-old, and when she was born and taking care of her, she cried just like everybody,
right.
just like
That's
every
right.
baby.
Right.
And I felt just as much stress. It's hard. It's heartbreaking, and it's hard. And sometimes you have to put the baby down and leave the room.
Right.
Once you've gone through all of the things that you need to do, and you know that the baby is safe, and we're going to get to those safe sleeping, if you put the baby in a safe place and remove yourself from the situation, so that rather than shake the baby, that's a much better solution.
That's correct. And they need to settle. They'll learn to settle themselves, and if we get out of their way, and they'll learn to calm themselves down. They don't have that skill. They don't start out with that skill. And often they want to be held and cuddled, but they don't want anything physical done to them to make them stop crying.
Just before we get into the campaign, because it is so important for us to talk about the solutions, we've all heard about SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, and now there's been this sudden unexplained infant death syndrome. Who wants to handle explaining the difference between those two? Or if there is a difference?
I hate to do it, but I think the term SIDS, sudden unexpected infant death, the term SIDS referred to a baby that died suddenly and unexpectedly, in whom a thorough post-mortem examination fails to disclose the cause of death. So that means they have to have an autopsy done, and there's nothing. It doesn't look like there's anything wrong with them, and that's the term that's then used. But more recently, epidemiologic studies have shown that there's a much higher rate of this phenomenon in babies who are in unsafe sleep practices, like put on their stomach to sleep, or put in something other than a crib or bassinet to sleep, like an adult bed. So that term, sudden unexpected infant death, is often used by the medical examiner to account for those things. And sometimes they'll actually come out and say, well, this was a positional asphyxia, because the baby is clear that the baby had fallen between the wall and the bed, for example, and was in such a position that they couldn't move their chest and couldn't breathe. So that's not an unexpected cause of death. That's asphyxia. Right. So, not wanting to make anyone feel bad about the tragedy of the death, but that being said, it's better that we don't repeat the tragedy of the death. Right. So we should at least learn from it and realize that the babies die because they were placed somewhere that wasn't safe. So a crib is a safe place because the baby can't fall out of it. And they can't do anything in there, pretty much. I mean, it's mostly there's padding on the bottom. There doesn't need to be any padding around the outside. And there shouldn't be anything in there that they can get tangled up in. So that's the safest place they can be.
So,
and they won't fall off and break their head, too, because we also see a lot of skull fractures in babies that fell off a changing table, that fell off a bed. So they may not die of suffocation, but they can also fall, and they will typically sustain a skull fracture. And that's a very common cause of hospital admission in the first year of life, is the baby fell off of something and has a skull fracture.
One of the things I'm very proud of in Broward County is the way we try to get to the root cause of a problem, and then we look for ways to address it. And certainly when it comes to babies dying, that is just unacceptable. We can't allow that to happen, and we've spent a lot of time figuring out why is it happening, and SIDS or SUIDs, the asphyxia, the shaken baby, unsafe caregivers, and so on. We've seen those, and infections. We've had another show on infections. But now we're starting a campaign to address those issues. Donna, the Healthy Start Coalition is leading the way here. Can you talk about the Safe Baby campaign?
Yes, absolutely. And before I get into that, I just want to demonstrate with statistics. Last year, 16 babies died due to sleep-related and SIDS that were either sleep-related or SIDS. Of those, 3 actually were noted as SIDS with the unexpected, which means that 13 of those babies died because of sleep-related incidences. And therefore they would have been preventable deaths. So that's why we at the Broward Healthy Start Coalition found it very important to go out and educate not just the moms and the dads, but we're also educating professionals at the level of social work and nurses who are out in the community, as well as the parents and the general public. What we'll be doing is we're going to be implementing something called the Safe Baby campaign. It has several different components to it. It is primarily an educational campaign, but eventually it should have some larger social marketing types of activities involved in it. We're addressing 3 issues. We're addressing the issue of safe sleeping, we're addressing the issue of shaken baby syndrome, and how we're doing that is primarily through the teaching of that crying is normal, that it is the parents or the caregiver that's going to get frustrated. One of the DVDs that's attached to our video has a very powerful message. In it, a pediatrician from University of South Florida states that, to his knowledge, no baby has ever died from crying. So therefore it is okay and normal for a baby to cry. The important thing is to put that baby in a safe place on their back, and if you need to remove yourself or take a break and get somebody else to be there for the child, that's okay. And you just check on the baby every 5 to 10 minutes to make sure the baby's okay. But having said that, getting back to this campaign, the third component is selecting a safe caregiver, because that's also very important. Some of the things that we found in a lot of data is that oftentimes when accidents happen, the child is not with their biological mother. The child is with someone else, and oftentimes it could be a relative, it could be just a friend of the family. Oftentimes it isn't happening at child care centers. It's happening when you leave that child with a friend or a neighbor or possibly somebody that you think you know, but maybe you don't know them very well or very long. So it is very, very critical for mom to know who she's leaving with the child with, to make sure that if she knows that this person is somebody who might have a short fuse, a hot temper, someone who's not used to being around children or doesn't have experience being around children, maybe that isn't the best person to be leaving the child with, or that she should make it a point to educate that person and let them know what her expectations are, and also in a lot of cases we are encouraging mothers to do criminal background checks independently on people that they would be leaving their children with.